years, we've seen Donald Trump indicted and prosecuted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times.
And 2 assassination attempts, Senator.
I have to say, Javert from Les Mis would be chagrined at the efforts of Democrats to do anything possible to take him down. And I believe the real target in this was not President Trump, but it was the American people, that these prosecutions were brought because partisan prosecutors were terrified that the American people would do exactly what they did.
I'm really not going to answer that question, so let me get on to.
Would you like to?
I do have
I'd love
questions
to
for the second round.
You'll have a second round. Would you like to speak before I call on Senator Cruz?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Bondi, welcome. Thank you for
Thank you.
your long career in public service, and thank you for your willingness to take on this incredibly important office. You know, I have to say, I don't know that there is a more important position in this new administration than the position to which you have been nominated, Attorney General of the United States. I thought the exchange just a moment ago with Senator Hirono was illustrative. She asked you how you would respond if the president asked you to target his political enemies. It's rather striking because it's not a hypothetical. It has happened over the last 4 years. And I think perhaps the most tragic legacy of the Biden-Harris administration has been the politicization and the weaponization of the United States Department of Justice. And we don't need to ask hypothetically because Joe Biden publicly mused and allowed the New York Times to report it, calling on Merrick Garland, why will he not prosecute Trump more quickly? And Merrick Garland, sadly, he sat in that chair and promised to be apolitical, and he broke that promise almost the instant he walked into the Department of Justice. If you look on the west pediment of the Supreme Court of the United States, just above the entrance, there's a simple yet profound 4-word phrase, equal justice under law. We have seen over the last 4 years a Department of Justice that systematically targeted the political opponents of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and that systematically protected his friends and allies. And it is tragic to see the loss of confidence in the American people, in the Department of Justice, and in the FBI. I would note, I don't think there's an institution in America who has lost more respect from the American people than the FBI has in the last 4 years. That is a grotesque violation of the obligation of the Department of Justice and the FBI. So I want to start with just a very simple question. If you are confirmed as Attorney General, will you pledge to fairly and faithfully uphold the law regardless of party?
So help me God.
Amen. Look, and I want to be clear for folks at home. I don't want a Republican Department of Justice. I don't want a Democrat Department of Justice. I want a Department of Justice that follows the damn law. And I think the American people do too. That shouldn't be too much to expect. Now, I'm grateful to President Trump for nominating you. I think on any objective level, you're clearly qualified for this position. You have been a prosecutor for decades. You have been the elected Attorney General of the state of Florida, the 3rd largest state in America, for 8 years. Let me ask you, in terms of your practice, how many criminal cases over the course of your career have you personally handled?
Handled thousands.
How many of those were before a jury?
Hundreds. I don't want to overstate, but hundreds. I was in a courtroom for many years. I tried 4 when I was an intern, jury trials. I think you had to try at least 20 in misdemeanor before you went to felony. Then you were in court every day. And I was also lead trial attorney for many years trying many cases. So.
And how many of those cases would have been before a judge?
Oh, hundreds and hundreds as well, but hundreds before a jury, I would assume.
And as Attorney General of Florida, how many lawyers did you supervise roughly?
Approximately 400, Senator.
Now, I also want to clarify something. During the course of this hearing, several Democrat senators have referred to you as President Trump's, quote, personal lawyer. Now, I don't believe that is an accurate characterization. As I understand it, you represented President Trump as a White House special advisor during his first impeachment trial. Is that correct?
Within Office of White House Counsel, yes, Senator.
And is working within the White House counsel's office different than representing Donald J. Trump individually as his personal lawyer?
Absolutely.
How's it different?
You're working for the government. You're working for the office of White House counsel. You're not representing him in his personal capacity.
And so you have not represented him in his business affairs, in his personal life, or in any of the criminal trials he has faced.
No, Senator.
And you know, when it comes to weaponization, it's worth noting that in more than 2 centuries of our nation's history, no president had previously been indicted, no president had previously been prosecuted until the Biden-Harris White House came along. And in the last 4 years, we've seen Donald Trump indicted and prosecuted not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 separate times.
And 2 assassination attempts, Senator.
I have to say, Javert from Les Mis would be chagrined at the efforts of Democrats to do anything possible to take him down. And I believe the real target in this was not President Trump, but it was the American people, that these prosecutions were brought because partisan prosecutors were terrified that the American people would do exactly what they did in November of 2024 and vote to reelect Donald J. Trump.
By 77.3%. Million Americans. 77.3 million Americans.
Will you commit every day as Attorney General to follow the law, to follow the Constitution, to uphold the rule of law without favor and without regard to the partisan position of any criminal defendant?
Yes, Senator.
That's what we should all expect from an Attorney General. Thank you.
We'll now recess for 30-minute lunch break. That means we'll be back.
It lands like a gavel. Senator Ted Cruz, eyes steady, voice clipped with disbelief. This one really takes the cake. In a chamber thick with accusation and counter-accusation, he fixes the lens back on first principles and on the nominee before him, former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, drawing a hard line between rhetoric and record. A moment earlier, he'd watched colleagues imply loyalties and motives. Now he answers with specifics. Where were you on judgment? What did you do in courtrooms? How many cases did you try? How many lawyers did you lead? The pace tightens, the temperature rises, and the hearing pivots from caricature to credential. Bondi describes decades in prosecution, hundreds of jury proceedings, hundreds more before judges, a tenure managing roughly 400 attorneys. The room hears not rumor, but resume. Cruz then turns to the heart of the charge, weaponization. He cites 4 years of politicization at the Department of Justice and the FBI, a collapse of trust so profound he calls it one of the most tragic developments in recent memory. He reminds the room of the words carved into stone above the Supreme Court entrance, equal justice under law, not as a slogan, but as a standard. He speaks the uncomfortable truth. The public's reverence for institutions has eroded, and the cost of that erosion is measured in cynicism that corrodes the foundation of the republic. Then, the question that should never be controversial, and yet now must be asked under oath. If confirmed, will you faithfully uphold the law regardless of party? Bondi answers, so help me God. A vow not to a president, but to the Constitution, and so the hearing becomes a referendum on legitimacy. Cruz separates what the job is from what the job has been alleged to be. He refuses the false binary of a Republican DOJ versus a Democrat DOJ. He calls for a Department of Justice that follows the damn law. It is not profanity, it is urgency. Because when legal authority begins to sound like political argument, the people lose their anchor. The promise of blind justice becomes a mirror reflecting only power. Then comes clarity on another contested narrative. Was Bondi merely a personal lawyer to a president, as some contend? Cruz presses. Bondi answers. She served in the office of White House counsel during an impeachment, working for the government, not for a private client. It's a small distinction to the uninitiated, a decisive one to those who understand how constitutional machinery is supposed to operate. The difference matters because process matters. End process, guardrails, lines, Roles traces the boundary between the rule of law and the rule of men. Cruz catalogs the unprecedented, indictments of a former president, prosecutions multiplied, and notes that in more than 2 centuries of American life, none of this had happened until now. He argues the prosecutions targeted not just a man, but the voters themselves, invoking numbers and elections as proof of a political aim. You may disagree with his interpretation or embrace it. The importance is not the partisan conclusion, but that the charge is made in daylight, on the record, and bound to accountability by the very forum built for it. Hearings are memory. Transcripts are the nation's ledger. And when senators press claims, from the pediment to the plea, the American people can weigh them in full view. What this moment reveals is bigger than one nominee, bigger than a quarrel over labels and loyalties. It reveals what happens when the public's trust in law enforcement and prosecution is strained to the breaking point. When justice stops sounding like a civic virtue and starts sounding like a strategy, ordinary citizens recoil. They retreat from institutions. They stop believing courts can constrain power and start believing power can conscript courts. That is dangerous. Because a republic does not collapse in a single blow. It thins out day by day as faith in its impartial instruments evaporates. Bondi's oath, the pledge to apply the law, without favor and without regard to the partisan position of any criminal defendant, is both promise and warning. Promise because it sketches the DOJ the nation needs. Warning because it highlights how far the department can fall when it drifts from that standard. Cruz frames the stakes with ruthless simplicity. Do not be our DOJ or their DOJ. Be the DOJ. That is the only oath that survives history. And in that declaration, the broader moral architecture comes into focus. Leadership is not the power to punish enemies and protect friends. It is the discipline to restrain yourself when you are tempted to do both. Power, left unchained by principle, always seeks advantage. Law, rightly applied, turns power back into duty. That is the American design. That is the point of robes, badges, and the words chiseled in granite. If equal justice becomes a partisan slogan, then the granite is only decoration, the oath only sound. So what is exposed here, under the glare of the hearing lights, is a choice. Will the Department of Justice become again the nation's impartial sword, or remain a weapon in the hands of whichever side holds it next? Will the FBI recover the public's trust, not by insisting on deference, but by earning it with transparency, humility, and equal application of the law? Will those who seek the heights of legal authority accept the lowest place of service to the Constitution? The answer cannot be crowdsourced to outrage or surrendered to fatigue. It will be determined by whether vows spoken in this room become conduct beyond it, by whether this nominee, and every official who follows, fulfills the plain promise that the powerful will be treated as citizens, and citizens as equals before the law. This is the moral horizon of the hearing you've just witnessed. Not score settling, not theater, but a reckoning with what justice will mean in the years ahead. Remember the pediment. Remember the oath. Remember that a nation is only as free as its laws are fair, and only as strong as its institutions are trusted. If the principle sounds simple, it is because the truth is simple and unforgiving. If you believe moments like this must be seen, understood, and preserved, if you want more hearings decoded with moral clarity and cinematic focus, subscribe to Liberty Congress of USA.